Hi everyone, you're listening to Achieve Balance with Dr. Arminta, a show brought to you to help you be healthier, happier, and more vitalistic next year than you are this year. You can find us at achievebalancechiropractic.com/podcast. And you can find us on Facebook as well. We are looking forward to helping you be healthier in your future. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the show. Hey guys, it's Dr. Arminta here with the Achieve Balance Podcast, and I'm back with you today with another episode. I have some very special guests with me today. His name is Dr. Travis Corcoran. We actually graduated at chiropractic college together, but he is an amazing doctor over in Europe and the Netherlands is where you practice, and he has several clinics that he runs, and we're going to talk to you today about one of his favorite topics, which is the mind and psychology and balance. So Travis, I wanted to ask you about what got you from, you were United States bound and then you went over to Europe to practice right out of school, or actually Malaysia is where you started, and then you've landed in Europe. So tell us about your journey there, and then we're going to hit into the mind.
Okay, well, right after graduation, I saw that it was a big opportunity to go anywhere because chiropractic, its value is global. And so I thought it was a good opportunity. That's why I went to Malaysia. Long story short, it was amazing, but more opportunity opened up in Europe. And so I was there. And I worked for someone for a year and 8 months. It was I took a lot from that experience, but thought I could make something better, and that's what I did. And then within the first 5 years of practice, we already had 5 clinics. We've now but we've been open now 7.5 years, and with plans to expand more, like into Portugal, Czech Republic, Norway, possibly Malta.
Wonderful. So in your practice, you teach a lot about the educated intelligence, innate intelligence. Let's expand on that. Let's define it first, because some of our listeners might not know.
Well, I'm sure your listeners know plenty about physiological balance, and that health comes from homeostasis or balanced adaptivity. And that's easy for a lot of us to understand. Like we were talking earlier, it's easy for me to weigh and hold something, and if you can taste, touch, see, hear, like things. And that's why physiology has always been easy and been the primary focus of health. As you know, though, true health is like a complete, it's all aspects. And so it's not just the physical, but it's also the psychological. So we don't just need, for true health, physiological balance, but we also need to achieve psychological balance. And I would argue that if they're not both in balance, then you're out of balance. So philosophy for me has been the way that I bridged or learned so much about psychology. I see philosophy as bridging physiology, all the things that are easily available to us empirically, right, through the senses. And from that, we learn principles, and the principles are true, right? And so once they're true, they're applicable as well in this abstract or immaterial realm, the intellect. So philosophy is what I use to deduce those principles, and many scholars long before me, especially in the profession of chiropractic, and have taken those, and it offers you a lot of insight into psychology, which is difficult to understand. Just like physiology, there's structure and anatomy. A quick example would be some of the contradictory things I hear about psychology nowadays, and it's unfortunate. Maybe we've said them ourselves too, but I've really learned to start correcting these things. And one of those is to get rid of your ego or drop your ego. Now, imagine if you were to say that about physiology, right? Hey, my gallbladder's not working. Drop the gallbladder. Get rid of it. Now, why do we do that? Now, if you understand the principle, then you would never say that about the psychology. Hey, get rid of the ego. Hey, get rid of the subconscious. Those things are there for a reason, and they have a function, right? And so getting rid of the ego does as much good for your psychology as getting rid of your gallbladder does for your physiology. Yeah, the ego is not the problem. It's the environment that it's in, just like the gallbladder, right? So you really need to clean the environment. So the model that I have, or like after all these years, what I've come up with is, if you consider reality like this line, and we're in alignment with it or we're not. And politically, this would be the easiest example. Some people have left-leaning views, some have right-leaning views or perspectives, right? So there is a reality, there is a truth. Yeah. Truth is not an objective noun, or it's an objective noun rather, not a subjective noun, like perspective. Perspective is a subjective noun, it's very relative. Like you have your perspective, I have my perspective, and we use a possessive pronoun before that. But with truth, I see nowadays people are saying your truth, my truth, and that's a huge problem.
Oh, that's a huge. Yeah. It's distortion of reality.
Yeah, through language, right? The truth has a very specific meaning. It is an objective noun, and the problem that stems from that, once you start saying that truth is relative, then you also become moral relativists. So, for instance, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Adolf Hitler, the things these people have done, if you really adhere to that moral relativist philosophy that there is no truth, of course the same people that say that believe that there's such thing as deceptions, but its actual opposite, the truth, somehow doesn't exist. It's crazy. Anyway, so if you adopt this moral relativist philosophy, then any act is beyond judgment or moral, right? So whatever Joseph Stalin did, hey, don't judge him. That's his truth, right? Now that's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So we have to accept there is such a thing as objective truth. There is such a thing as reality. And of course we have many perspectives of it. In what many old scholars would call the great work is to, and what I think is really like our greatest challenge in our work and what we should be doing as humans to our expression here, is lining our perception up with reality, right? The closer your perception is lined up with the reality, or if you think about frequency, the more it intersects with it, right? Like a low frequency hits reality not very often, but a high frequency person is hitting reality a lot. They're not spending much time to the left or to the right. And when your perception's lined up with reality, your ego is serving you. When your perception is out of alignment with reality, it's still doing its job. The ego simply defends your perception. That's it. When it comes,
protecting you.
Yeah, it does its job.
It's design.
Right. But it's like now we have this like autoimmune disease of the psychology. Because when I'm confronted with conflicting data that conflicts with my perception, the ego steps up, right? So if I line my perception up, I know what reality is. That really does serve me. You're trying to sell me swampland in Florida or something, right? If I know the truth, my ego is going to prevent me from making a bad decision. If I understand principles, truth, and I understand something, then I'm not swayed by authority, by emotions, right? And so my ego is really protecting me. Now, say I have some radical views that I took as the truth, like someone appealed to my emotions, or they appealed to authority, and my mind wasn't thinking for itself, and I accepted some belief pattern or perception. And you threaten that with the truth or the extreme opposite, and my ego just steps up to serve you. That's all. It's just doing its job.
Right.
And I don't think removing the ego is really the solution. Right? The real solution requires actual hard work. If you want to get fit, physiologically, you have to invest work in the gym, what you eat, you make very conscious decisions. Now, psychologically, though, what we have, I think, going on in our current social structure and culture is we don't want to do work. We're very intellectually lazy. You know, we are convinced that my feelings is an active process of thinking. When feelings are passive, they're a passive thing. They serve us really well. They have a certain function, but it is not an active process. Thinking is an active process, and we don't want to engage that because it requires work, just like going to the gym. Yeah.
And I think another thing when it comes to that is our culture has set us up over the years to pay attention to the things that we can measure, like food and workouts and in the physiological measurements. But what we're talking about with the psychology is it's immeasurable.
Yeah.
substance, and it takes an immense amount of work and focus to put your attention or your life onto that work to really figure out who is in there and what is my perspective on and how does it align with my values so that I can be congruent with truth.
And yes, is your perspective true? Yeah.
Right? Or am I just living in this distorted viewpoint and being taught how to actually think by somebody else's viewpoint?
Of course, yeah, you hit it right on the head. It's just a matter of, it's hard to blame individuals because I understand the appeal. It's very easy, like you said, I can measure these physiological things, these physical things. So it's very easy, I understand. I see the results right away. But it is really challenging. It does require the skill of reasoning, which is something you develop just like athletic ability. We can also develop intellectual ability and prowess and skill. And as many people know, everything starts in your mind. Right? You hear a lot of people saying your thoughts create your reality. Of course, they take out the action part, that part of responsibility, the ability to respond. So you have these thoughts. If you don't take action, you don't create any reality. Right, good or bad. Right. So it's funny that all our focus is on the easy thing, but it makes sense, right? It's on the physiology. It's easy to grab and understand. Though the real benefit, and the real work, and real health, and real expression, and for me, means first intellectual health or psychological health, and keeping that in balance and training that. Once that's trained, since it dictates everything you do physiologically, it would only make sense to achieve psychological health first. Otherwise, you're just, in Dutch we say, dweilen met de kraan open. It's like mopping with the sink on. It's just, you're mopping, but it's just overflowing. It's never going to stop. You're wasting your time. So that's how I feel when a lot of people are so anxious for this physical health, but neglect their psychological health.
Now, when you teach your patients about this and you talk to them, what are the tangible to-do items? Where would you start? Like if somebody wanted to really start to dive in and dig in to do the work that is required to maintain the health of the psyche, what would you recommend?
I have plenty of books I recommend, and I always think there's some books I would like to recommend right away, or some things I'd like to talk about immediately, but that's really not where that client's at the time. Right? So what the action steps are or what you would do, that would really depend on the client and where they're at. And a long time ago, I probably would have just blanket statement everyone with, hey, you should do this, look into this, or have you heard about this? Over the years, though, I'm kind of learning where people are at through questioning and talking to them. I've listened a lot better, and it tells me where people are at and where to start. So that's a tough question to answer. It was just very individual. But my focus is on the trivium. I just ask people if they know anything about it or they're curious about it, and which is the first three of the 7 liberal arts. I like those because that's what that means: freedom, liberty. Liberal arts, the arts of liberating your mind. And unless you're doing that, your mind is not liberated. It's enslaved by appeal to authority, appeal to emotion.
So let's dive into those, because a lot of listeners might not have any idea what you're talking about in terms of those top 3. So
okay, well, they've gone by a lot of different names because the concepts haven't changed. Maybe the names and how they've been described. But a long time ago, it was just called knowledge, and they go in this particular order. Yeah, but the chronology is significant: knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Then it was more formalized later on around the Renaissance, and then it was called grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And more contemporary terms would be input, processing, output. That's the easiest way to say. And that makes sense, right? There's nothing to process or understand without this data first, or some knowledge. And that's what grammar is. There's specific and general grammar. And that's just basically how we identify stuff. Before you and I can understand something or use skills of reasoning and logic, we have to name stuff, construct our statements correctly, right? So grammar or knowledge is concerned with correctness. Is this the correct word to represent this concept, right? When I say cup, I'm talking about something you drink from. If you say cup, but you're talking about something you write with, I don't know what you're talking about. And for us to understand any more about that, it's not going anywhere until we're using the correct language. Right? And so then once we know that, or we have correct knowledge, and it may be true or false, but we're using the correct representations for concepts, then we begin to make statements. Then we go into the second liberal art, logic, and we evaluate those statements with a reproducible, systematic method of analysis. And like symbolic logic is probably the best. I use sentential logic. And logic is concerned not with correctness, because that's already been taken care of by grammar. Logic is concerned with truth. Is it true or is it false? Are there contradictions? Have we removed those contradictions? Is this a valid deductive argument or a strong inductive argument? That's what I want to know in the logic phase. So at that point, once we know something, then we go to understand it, and then we can communicate it, and that's rhetoric or wisdom, like intelligence in action. That would be wisdom is an active process. So, and that's where I like, the focus for me is more on logic and rhetoric, and I think for you too, when you communicate to your clients, you already have a knowledge and understanding of chiropractic and very much in health in general. And so to be effective, you work on the art of rhetoric and how you communicate. That's what the third liberal art is concerned with, effectiveness. And what I see right now in the world is there's people know a lot of things, but they don't understand it. Yeah, they know their point of view, but they've never evaluated if it's true or not. They've evaluated it with emotion. Like, I read this or I heard it and it resonated with me, it felt good, no more evaluation. They've accepted it, and then they talk about it. So they go from step one, knowledge, right to communication or rhetoric. I know something, I talk about it.
It's almost like inheriting a belief system from somebody else. And
Exactly.
I think that a big part of the conversation that we're having is the fact that we take the information that we have been given as we develop as truth, instead of as perspective. And we don't question it. It's like, like the Four Agreements book. It talks about, what have you learned from your parents, your teachers, your preachers, as you go through, developing your mind and finding out what is truth is actually just perspective of somebody else's belief system.
Oh man, that's so well said. Exactly. That's we inherit these belief systems. That's what it is. And it's no fault of our own individually.
No, but it is a responsibility
of
the individual to, if they would like to actually be psychologically healthy, which is part of being, balanced and achieving balance in our health, is they have to question where their perspective came from. And does that perspective actually line up with the truth? And the more on point it is with truth, the less your ego gets ruffled, if you like. Or
the more it serves you.
Correct.
Right? The better the environment for your gallbladder, the better it's serving you. Right? That's spot on, and it is a responsibility. You have to step up. What I want to say is we're just in a culture that's not providing you with those tools to evaluate those beliefs. We live in a culture that engenders an inflammation of emotion.
Every bit of information that our culture receives is emotional.
Sensationalist, I would say.
In terms of heightening it's not a lot of actual concepts, it's just a lot of he said, she said, and emotional aspects, and that's how we're actually creating our thoughts and creating our beliefs. And this is why, as a society, there's a lot of imbalance and lack of health of the actual society.
I would dare say we are not creating our thoughts. I would say that someone is creating your thoughts for you until you reign in control of your ability to reason and respond, right?
Mm-hmm.
As long as you let the emotions run wild, and it's easy to do, like I said, this culture rewards emotional outrage or whatever, but it condemns or ridicules intellectual rigor. So it is difficult, but not impossible. And the greater the challenge, the greater the rewards, because you'll achieve health beyond, you'll achieve balance, I'll say,
right,
beyond anything you could just focusing on the physiology.
Right. So some of our thoughts and our takeaways here is that why do you think the way that you think, or believe the things the way that you believe them?
Yeah.
Have you ever, asked why, and dug into self and figured out truth and asked how balanced is my perspective on that? And by doing that, you'll actually improve your physiological health while you're doing it, and you'll be that much closer to having more balance in terms of your overall physiological.
That's the key thing. Physiology follows the psychology. So putting the focus, especially as chiropractors, we always talk about healing is an inside-out job. Yet, if you ignore the inside, and there's nothing more deep, more inside you than your own psychology. So the neglecting of that does make healing very difficult, if not impossible. Focusing on physiology first with pills and surgeries, that's very outside in. In order to make a decision if you're going to take medication or surgery or change things in your environment, you need to be a clear thinker. So again, it benefits you to have a clear and healthy psychology or intellect. And that is something we can work on systematically and be thankful for.
Absolutely, and I think that actually gives the individual a journey to really self-discovery, self-awareness, and then it brings into the harmony of the, we obviously have the body, which is the physiology aspect, but what about the mind, which is what we're talking about, and how does that influence the spirit part of us, is all in that connection too. So I love this conversation.
Yeah, and I've known Arminta, I've known you for a long time, and I absolutely love and appreciate you, and I admire you too. I absolutely admire you and your service. I would say everyone, I know you do, and I know I do, we all desire freedom. Freedom, political freedom, financial freedom.
It is
freedom
the number
from
one
ailment.
desire for all individuals when you get down to the root. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? That word encapsulates all of it.
Yes, and that encapsulates everything we're talking about too. I want my mind liberated, freed. I don't want it interfered with. I want to be fully me. And that's my favorite quote. I've been sharing it all weekend with everyone, and that is from Mikhail Bakunin, a Russian philosopher. He says, it's translated from Russian, but he says, the liberty of man consists solely in this, that he himself obeys the laws of nature because he recognizes them as such, not because they've been imposed upon him externally by some other will, foreign, divine, or more mortal, individual, or collective. And that to me is so key. What we need for liberty or freedom is to recognize reality, or what he says, natural laws. Those must be obeyed, not because you read what they were, but because you've evaluated them, right? And that's an endeavor and a process to take on for yourself, not just, hey, have you read that book? Great, got it. Now I'm so much wiser. Evaluate the material that you've consumed.
And really churn on it, because ultimately that is a huge missing link when it comes to achieving health, or making sure that your body is in the great body, mind, spirit is in the greatest state to be the greatest potential, so we can have the greatest experience while we're here on this earth.
Yeah, we could recommend books to each other all day.
Oh my gosh!
And if the rhetoric is good, or we go to a speaker and the rhetoric is good, it's going to be very influential. And if you just take it at face value, and it may be true, it may or may not be, that's irrelevant. The point is that once you figure it out for yourself, then your mind is free. Even if someone shares with you the greatest truths in the world, you're still not free until you've deduced them for yourself, until you have done that, right? Otherwise, you are still enslaved. You are not liberated. Unless you practice the arts of liberty or the liberal arts, there is no path to freedom. It's just you are a slave to authority or a slave to those that engender your emotions.
So true. So true. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and I adore you and what you do over there. So until next time, guys, we will catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Hi guys, Dr. Arminta here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope today's episode brought you information to help you eat better, move better, think better, and take care of the true root of your health issues. You can find us online at achievebalancechiropractic.com/podcasts, and you can find us on social media as well. We look forward to having you here the next episode, and we look forward to helping you create a healthier future tomorrow.